Nobody quits a logo, right? Nobody quits a company. You quit people. You've got a damaged relationship. There's lack of trust. There's lack of respect. You can't hold two emotions at the same time. You can't be anxious and grateful.
Welcome to the DesignRush podcast. I'm your host, Kia Johnson. Today's guest is Chester Elton, bestselling author, executive coach, and co-founder of The Culture Works. He's helped brands like American Express, the World Bank, and Zoox build cultures grounded in trust, gratitude, and resilience. In this episode, Chester breaks down what crisis-proof teams do differently, from turning failure into learning moments to leading with care and clarity, even under pressure. He explains why joy, recognition, and communication aren't just soft skills, they're strategies. If you lead a team, run an agency, or coach executives, this one's packed with insights you can use right away. Watch the full episode on YouTube or listen wherever you get your podcasts, and don't forget to subscribe. Your books have actually shaped how leaders build high-performing teams. What is one project you're most proud of where you saw your strategies truly reshape a team or a company?
Yeah, it's really interesting. A family business. We're always very careful with our clients' names and projects and so on. This is a family company where, really worked with the top leaders and family members on making sure that there was joy in the workplace. Sounds kind of interesting. I'll never forget the owner said, "What is your goal for me?" And I said, "My goal is to get you to happy, because no one here is happy." you know, and it was very interesting. He said, "In my culture, it's not about happiness; it's about fulfilling your obligations." And the passion and the joy was missing from the business. They'd had it, early on, as many founders do. And so that was probably my favorite project, where, yes, the business success followed. What needed to happen first was that there was joy in work. That they really realized that what they did was fun, that they created great memories for people, and the ripple effect through their family, which was what was the most gratifying.
Would you say then that having to, guide leaders through crises like economic shifts and hybrid work or AI disruption, that you need to get them to the base of joy, and that's perhaps a challenge, a very tough challenge that you face when you're trying to guide leaders through these?
Yeah, I think you can measure joy. Absolutely, you can. Yeah, and and it's represented in turnover and engagement scores, in promotions and longevity. So I think you can. It's so interesting to me that the companies that have the most success are companies where people are passionate about what they do. We wrote a book called All In. It was all about an all-in culture, how the best leaders create a culture of belief that drives big results. And we say, look, an all-in culture is a place where I believe what I do matters and I make a difference. And when I make a difference, it's noticed and celebrated. So if I believe what I do is really important and I'm making a difference, like I can connect what I do every day to the mission and vision. Say it's a hospital, say it's legal professions, let's say it's a resort where you're creating forever memories, or a financial institution where you're helping set people up to pay for college or a home or retirement. I mean, people that understand not just what they do and how they do it, they understand why they do it. That brings joy. That brings joy. And I look, and there are companies that are ridiculously successful that are terrible places to work, right? And they're manufacturing or whatever, and it's just the scale of the business. And yet in each of those teams, and we talk about this a lot, I can control the culture and the joy on my team. I may not be able to connect it to the overall organization. I can bring joy to my team. And those are the leaders you want to work for, right? Where when the alarm goes off, I'm kind of excited to go to work, as opposed to, can I get in another 20 minutes of sleep before I have to go to work? So I think joy and passion and gratitude, those are the elements of great places to work and highly productive places. If I'm passionate about what I do, I'm going to do a better job.
So would you then say from your work with thousands of leaders, that what separates teams that thrive under pressure from those that collapse, these that you've just mentioned, joy being such a pinnacle part of it, is so important, and that's what actually separates those teams?
Yeah, it's the leader. It always comes back to leadership, and
Yeah.
and that's why we spend so much time at the top of the house, right? The ripple effect of a great leader is tangible, as is the ripple effect of a poor leader. It is true, and will always be true. Nobody quits a logo, right? Nobody quits a company. You quit people. You've got a damaged relationship. There's lack of trust. There's lack of respect, right? Nobody says they changed the company logo. I didn't like it, so I quit. That never happens. Change the boss. Find a boss that's just all about checking the boxes, and we call it work for a reason. And leave your personal life at the door, and shut up and get to work. You don't tend to have people stay very long.
Have you ever had or come across an example of like a company that successfully built a crisis-proof team in your experience that you've had so far?
I'm so glad you asked. Yes. Do you know the product WD-40? Does that ring a bell?
Yes, it does.
Yeah, it's grease in a can, right? This is it, WD-40. It's a wonderful little company out of San Diego. The CEO just recently retired, Gary Ridge, dear friend of mine, and in their culture, they embrace crisis, and they say, look, there's going to be crisis, whether it's supply chain or a pandemic or tariffs, whatever you want to talk about, political changes and so on. Everywhere you go, people are going to hear about the horror. When they come to WD-40, we want them to hear about happiness and joy and engagement. And WD-40 actually stands for Water Displacement 40th Formula. So it's really interesting. It took them 40 tries to get it right. 40. That's stick to it, right? So their mantra is, we don't make mistakes, we have learning moments. And that's a crisis-proof culture, right? Because whenever there's a crisis and you make a mistake, it's like, okay, what did we learn? How do we fix it and move on? It's not about blame. It's not about scapegoating. It's about solve the problem. Now, more product placement. Gary literally just wrote a book called "And Any Dumbass Can Do It." Yeah, and it's learning moments from an everyday CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company, and it's yeah, no, and I'm so glad you asked about crisis proof, because when you believe that every crisis is a learning moment, you embrace things a lot differently.
I hear you. It's almost like really shifting your perspective because we live in a state of fear all the time.
Absolutely. Yeah, see, we've seen a real shift in leadership, Kia, from the traditional command and control to maybe a little more collaboration to now, workers, particularly the younger generations coming into the workplace. They don't want their leaders just to make them better worker bees, right? They want them to help them become better people. Now think about that. That's a huge shift, right? So how do you do that? Well, now your role as a leader has shifted from check the box, get things done, to being a coach, a mentor, and a teacher. So if you're a leader listening to this podcast, understand you're in the education business. Whatever industry you're in, I guarantee you that whatever degree that they come into, it's not a degree on how to get things done at your company, because every company's got their own mechanisms and cultures, right? So your job is to teach them, coach them up, right? And be that mentor that says, here's how you get things done. Here's how you deal with a crisis. Because if you want to grow and expand as a company, you have to have that next level leadership. You have to have a really strong bench. And those companies that invest in that bench, that invest in their leaders, in helping them become teachers and coaches and mentors, are those that are going to have a longer runway and much more success.
In your book, Anxiety at Work, you address the role of anxiety in modern workplaces. What I want to find out from you is, what steps can organizations take to reduce anxiety during times of crisis or significant disruption?
There's outside influences, right? I might not know how I'm doing as an employee. I don't know how the company is doing, those kinds of things. And so how do you remedy uncertainty? Again, it's communication. If I can answer these 4 questions on a regular basis, my anxiety levels come down. One is, how is the company doing, right? Where is the company going? Are we expanding? Are we contracting? Are we acquiring? Are we being acquired, right? Are we innovating? All those things, right? So how is the company doing and where's the company going? Secondly is, how am I doing and where am I going? The number one reason for young people leaving the workplace isn't money anymore. It's lack of growth. So I'm looking for growth opportunities. And I think that's misinterpreted by a lot of people that say, well, it means a raise and a promotion. Not necessarily. A growth opportunity. My son is a perfect example. Left a small company to go to a larger company because they did things that he wanted to learn how to do. That wasn't an option in a small company. So he made that move. Now, was it a little more money? I think it was. There was no grand title or anything like that, right? It was the opportunity to learn and grow and develop in his craft. That's why he left. So, you talk about reducing anxiety. Make sure people know what's going on, and that'll calm down. Having support in the workplace, having a community. Gallup did that wonderful study that said the most engaged employees have a best friend at work. Are you creating communities? We spend so much time at work. I'm willing to bet that the people listening to the podcast, if you've worked anywhere for any length of time, you've got a best friend at work. It's not just a coworker; it's somebody's got your back. Make sure you're not overloading people. I love asking this question when we have workshops or conferences, and that is, how many of you have a rock star on your team? And everybody raises their hand. I said, great. And in a crisis, in a tight deadline, what do you do with those rock stars? They go, load them up. We give them more work, right? Because they'll never say no. They won't eat. They won't sleep, to get it done. And 9 times out of 10, they are your most anxious employees because they never want to disappoint. So we have a wonderful analogy that, work is like a container ship, right? It can only hold so many containers. So I love the question is, if we say yes to this, what are we saying no to? In other words, if we're going to put this container on the ship, which one are we taking off? Because if we don't ever take any containers off, you sink the ship. And that's when you burn people out, and that's when anxiety is at an all-time high. So a few things that we talk about in the book. Interestingly enough, the 8th strategy is a gratitude strategy. You can't hold 2 emotions at the same time. You can't be anxious and grateful. So yeah, and so if within your teams you have some gratitude rituals, like the one I shared with you in the morning and the evening. We've got a company that we dealt with that had a rule is called 10 and 10. 10 minutes at the beginning of every workday and 10 minutes at the end of every workday. They'd get together as a team. They'd share success stories. They'd appreciate each other, and the way you start the day and end the day is really important. So that is also a stress reducer, right?
So Chester, I'm curious because we're within the B2B space as DesignRush, right? So we've got your brand leaders, your agency owners, C-level executives. So for many out there, they're the leader of an organization. So if I'm a leader and I would like to know how to identify anxiety in my own teams, like before it becomes a widespread issue that affects performance, how exactly do I go about doing that?
It's a great question because, you talk about your top performers, and in many cases, your top performers are really good about hiding it. People don't want to talk about mental health in the workplace, right? You talk about physical health all day long. Mental health has got a stigma attached to it. So how do you make it safe to talk about? We say, look for changes in behavior. To the point, look, anybody has a bad day. I get that. If someone who is never late starts showing up late, someone who never loses their temper all of a sudden starts losing their temper, somebody who's always engaged is more withdrawn. Yeah, those are clues, right? Then, of course, you've got to say, okay, well, then how do I start the discussion? Because there's such a stigma attached to mental health. I can't come up and say, hey, Kia, I read this book, Anxiety at Work, and I got to tell you, you check all the boxes. You are anxious, aren't you? Right? It doesn't work. It doesn't work. So we talk. Yeah, We talked to counselors and we said, how do you start the conversation? And they said, words are really important. Start the conversation with, I noticed. You know what, Kia? I noticed that you've had a really tough time getting to work. I was wondering if we could maybe talk about that and find a solution for you. Because when I say I noticed, your brain translates that to I care. I noticed equals I care. And when I know that my leader cares about me, then the odds of me sharing go up. The other tactic that's hard for a lot of leaders is share your story. Say, listen, Kia, I've noticed that you're just not yourself lately. I remember being you. I remember being new in the organization and the stress and everything. Trust me, I know what that feels like. And my way of dealing with it was I'd lose my temper, right? My way of dealing with it was hitting the bar after work every day or whatever, right? And say, you know what? It was an unhealthy way to deal with it. So I just want to let you know, I know what that feels like. And I've noticed these things. If you need to talk about it, if we need to find some workarounds, let me know. Because the biggest message that any leader can give their team is you're not alone. You're not alone. When we get anxious and we get stressed, we tend to pull back. And it's the worst thing we can do. We should invite people in to help. We won't do it because of the stigma, because we don't want to be perceived as weak. We don't want to be perceived that we can't do the job, you know. So this idea of I've noticed I care, I share my story, and you're not alone are keys to reducing all that.
Move the conversation a little bit now, Chester, to a couple of other things. I mean, we've got like AI, right? We've got economic pressures. We have got burnout. These are top concerns for businesses today. So what do you then see as the greatest challenge for leaders when building resilient teams?
You know, it's an interesting question, Kia. How do you build resiliency? You know, how do you build grit into your team? And I think first and foremost, it starts by example. You know, how do you handle that pressure? And how do you talk about that? You know, it's like the WD-40. The reason that they're so successful is because they talk about what did we learn? You know, how are we going to move forward? You invite people into the process, right? And so you're not just charging along on your own. I love the old African saying that says, if you want to go fast, go by yourself. If you want to go far, go together, right? And so how do you bring your team along? Well, it's by example. And it's repetition. You know, it's really interesting. I had the chance to talk to a world-class athlete. And, you know, he said, what do you think the key to greatness is? And I'll give you the quiz, Kia. Let's see what you think. He said, is it having a great coach? Is it repetition? Is it being on a great team? Or is it, you know, incredible physical ability? What would you think it would be? Coach, repetition, team, or ability? What do you think he said the key to greatness was?
Wouldn't it have to be all of those, though?
It's a little bit of all of them, but he said without this one, the rest don't matter.
The rest of, yeah. I mean, that's what I would say. Like, it had to be everything. You want to have a great coach. You also need to have the consistency as well, you know, where then comes the repetition. Yeah.
Well, pick one.
I would say a great coach.
Yeah, no, a good guess. He said repetition. He said reps. Absolutely. He says you get in your reps. You talk to great golfers. They've got to get in their reps. They've got to. You talk about, you know, Michael Phelps. We did a study on Michael Phelps. He has won more gold medals in swimming than anybody. And the key to his greatness is he loved to swim. He loved to practice. He would do his turns 100 times, right? And it's no surprise, right, that the marathon winners that run are always the marathon winners that put in the most miles. So yeah, a great coach is key. If you don't love to practice, if you don't get in your reps, it doesn't matter, right? You can be on the best team, you can have tremendous physical ability, right? And you can have a great coach, but if you don't put in the time, if you don't put in the reps. So resiliency and how do you build it in your teams is put in the reps. You talk about it. You work through the problems. You put in the time, right? To me, that's the key.
So, what would you then say are the common mistakes that businesses make when it comes to preparing their teams for disruptive changes like AI advancements or economic downturns rather? Would you say then that it's things like not having those reps in, you know, not constantly trying to hone their skills, perhaps not even doing something like, which is something that we've come across in a couple of other podcast episodes with other guests where they speak about upskilling your staff, for example, with AI advancements that come about. What would you say to that?
Yeah, the case study that comes to mind is a wonderful restaurant group here we have in the States called Texas Roadhouse. They've got about 450 restaurants, or they call them stores, around the world, right? When the pandemic hit, their takeaway business was 5%. I mean, literally, you had to go from nobody in the restaurants, which was their key to success, creating a party atmosphere, right? Loud music, a great bar, line dancing. I mean, peanuts on the floor. It was you go to Texas, it's magical, right? And extraordinary service, and they call it legendary food, legendary service, right? So now all of a sudden, that all goes away. No one can come into your restaurant. What do? You've got to go from 5% takeaway to 100% takeaway. The way they managed that was brilliant. The founder and the CEO, Kent Taylor, got on the phone every day with the key operators and said, what are you doing that works? Share your best practices, share your stories. Tell me what you're doing in North Carolina. Tell me what they're doing in Taiwan. Tell me what they're doing in California, right? And let's share those best practices and let's have at it. And they over communicate. They had daily phone calls, right? Daily sharing best practices. And then he'd grab his supply team and say, okay, how are we doing with masks and gloves? How are we doing with the supply chain? Do we have enough meat? Do we have enough, potatoes? On and on and on. And the energy around that, because everybody's voice was heard, everybody's opinion mattered. And I'm telling you, their stock went from $80 to like $18 overnight. Within 4 weeks, now think about this, Kia. This is the pandemic. Pandemic hits, they shut down all the rest. Within 4 weeks, they were profitable again. 4 weeks. And it's because their people believed in the company. They believed in their mantra of legendary food, legendary service. The owner came in and said, we're not laying off anybody. If you don't feel comfortable coming to work, no problem. We'll pay you to stay home. We're a family. We're in this together. We'll make it work. And before the end of the pandemic, their stock was over $100 a share.
That is amazing.
Yeah. So, how do you develop resiliency and grit? Well, first off, you've got a great culture. You've got people that care about each other. Secondly, when it hits, you go, okay, hey, you want to be legendary? Manage a restaurant through the pandemic. Yeah. And be profitable, right? It was amazing. When people actually could come back to work, they'd have what they call their alley rallies, right? At the beginning of the day, where they'd get everybody all psyched up for the day. And they'd welcome these employees, and they would break down in tears. They said, you have no idea how much I missed this.
If you were to say what the warning signs would be that would indicate a company is not properly preparing its teams for change, what would you say are those sort of warning signs that would be like, I think there's an issue here and it's not going to go the way that we want it to?
Yeah, I mean, the number one indicator is high turnover. If you've got a lot of people leaving, that's the sign of a toxic culture. To be resilient, you have to have people that have been there for a certain amount of time, that have really bought in to the culture. One company that does it very, very well is American Express. And one of the ways they do that is they invest in their people. They invest in their education. They invest in their leadership journey. We did a high potential leaders program. It was tremendous. And all those directors became vice presidents. I mean, they all did. And it was because the company invested in them as leaders and as people. Why would you leave? It's a very caring culture. They have people that go through trauma. They give them time off. They give them paid time off. They're very patient. They're very kind. Why would you leave for a 20% raise, even if in a culture that cares about you and where you can grow and develop? I mean, And then when crisis hits, you don't want to let the company down, as opposed to a stick culture where, you're just a worker being there beating the crap out of you. Crisis hits, I'm out. No, I need you to work harder. I need you to work long. No, you don't care about me. I don't care about you.
Can you then say that that would then point to a measurable impact on revenue or market share? I mean, we have been touching on that, saying that it would.
Yeah, I mean, take a look at WD-40 stock price. Take a look at Texas Roadhouse stock price. Take a look at American Express stock price over the last 10 years. I mean, if you bought every one of those stocks 10 years ago, trust me, you'd be doing very, very well. So yeah, does it translate? Absolutely, it does.
Yeah. Now, you've shared a couple of examples with me here today, but I'm wondering if you can expand a little bit more on that. If you have any additional examples to share of a company or organization that you've worked with that successfully navigated a crisis by focusing on culture and leadership, and maybe even go to the point of like unpacking what specific strategies that they used. Was there sort of a key place that they started at and ended at in order to achieve what they wanted to?
Yeah, listen, the three that we just talked about are perfect examples of communication, of caring, making sure their people were safe, were taken care of, right? Celebration. It was really interesting to me that, Texas Roadhouse, I mean, they celebrate everything, right? They're ringing bells. They're singing happy birthday. They're somebody hits their 1 year anniversary. There's, it's bells and whistles. And the same at American Express. At WD-40, they talk about no lying, no cheating, no hiding, right? And we over communicate every day, and we tie our core values to gratitude, and we express it every day. Every day. A wonderful hospital that we worked with down in Texas, a faith-based hospital, right? So they would have the new leader comes in, their engagement scores were like 10%, or something. It was ridiculous, right? In a year, turned it around up to 90%. And what he did was he said, look, we're going to have a sacred 60 every day. 60 minutes where every leader leaves their phone and their laptop in their office and walks around and talks to their employees and asks them about their work, about their families, about their goals, about their aspirations. Scott O'Neill, who's a brilliant leader in the world of sports, right? He says, look, we've got 3 rules: world class, no surprises, and we cheer for each other. And it was really interesting. He said, look, you've got to be a student of leadership. What works? Who are the great leaders? Who do you want to emulate? What are you taking away from that? And then he said, if you're not cheering for your people, why? If you got somebody on your team you can't cheer for, they probably shouldn't be on your team. Yeah, no, and he said, literally, he said, you think about your team. Who are you cheering for? Great, your top performers. Love those guys. Who are you not cheering for? Oh, well, so, well, why are they on your team? And then, by the way, who's your team not cheering for? Because your team often knows before you do that, Jake is a problem. Max is a problem. So, yeah, I mean, listen, to me, it's the leaders lead by example.
Yes,
and you set things up so that when a crisis hits, right? And listen, if I know somebody really cares about me and I am celebrated often for my contributions, I will show up in a crisis. I absolutely will, because you care about me. I care about you. I care about our customers. I believe that what we do matters. I believe it's important. I believe I make a difference, and we celebrate along the way. It's easier said than done, obviously. Those are the key elements.
Our following question, I want to get stuck in a couple of things right now. You've mentioned quite a couple of top tier companies, Capital One, Starbucks as well. You've also worked with them too. So is there specific tactics that they've used to maintain employee engagement, particularly in times of economic uncertainty? You did speak about Texas Roadhouse as well, but with these 2 specific examples, is there anything that you can share with us?
Not so much with those 2, right? I'll tell you, it's really interesting that when you talk about crises, it's not something that, oh, there's a crisis, now we kick everything in, right? You have to be prepared for that. You have to build it over time. And those are the organizations. A classic example is Johnson & Johnson. Now, this goes way back, but it's a case study every business school uses, and that was the Tylenol crisis. when a guy was putting poison pills in Tylenol bottles. And it was really interesting when they all gathered as leaders. They said, "Well, we'll pull off all the product in Chicago." And the CEO said, "Well, the credo, which is their guiding light, the number one person that matters at Johnson and Johnson is the patient, is the customer." And so he said, "No, we're not going to take it off just in Chicago. We're going to take it off the shelves everywhere in the world." And he said, "You'll bankrupt the company. You'll never recover." And he said, "That may be the case. Our obligation is to make sure that every one of our patients has a safe product that's going to make their lives better." Well, absolutely the opposite happened, right? Still, the number one trusted pain relief, medicine on the shelf is Tylenol. Yeah, and they didn't just, check the bottles and say, "Okay, this one's good," and put it back on the shelf. They threw it all out, all of it, so that there would be not even a scintilla of a chance that something would sneak through. They checked all their factories. They invited in the press, right? Another classic example is the Ford Motor Company. In the downturn when everybody's stock went to $1, the leadership came in from outside, right? From Boeing, and said, "Look, we don't have an engineering problem. We've got a people problem. We don't care about each other." And it's so interesting that, their number one motto during that crisis was, "It's all about our people. Love them up." This is the automotive industry, right? Love them up.
Are there any key metrics that executives can focus on when they are actually trying to measure the success of their leadership strategies, especially in times of crises?
Yeah, engagement scores are always a great indicator. I think turnover. Listen, I think actually a certain amount of turnover is healthy. You want people to get promoted and move on, right? You want underperformers to be called out and let them move on as well. I think when you only focus on one matrix, a lot of companies will focus only on the stock price matrix, quarter to quarter. And that's very dangerous because you'll cut corners to get there, right? So, what are your people metrics? I love to talk to leaders about what does your leadership tree look like? What other leaders have you developed that have gone on to lead? Is a great indicator. So, yeah, I mean, you listen, profit is a great indicator, right? We're in business to stay in business. And that's why, you just love the examples of Texas Roadhouse and the Ford Motor Company and so on, because you could trace their people strategies directly to their profitability and success. So, yeah, listen, even with all the distractions, whether it be economics or politics or whatever, if you're investing in your people, if you've got good leaders that know how to handle crisis, if you've got good leaders that know how to engage their teams, inspire their teams, you're going to be okay. I mean, it ever has it been so. It comes down to the leader. Invest in that.
What would you say is the biggest shift that you've seen in leadership or team management today? We were talking earlier about how the workspace has changed, but from that perspective in terms of leadership or team management, what would you say is the biggest shift that you've seen?
Yeah, it's a coaching culture, it's a learning culture, it's a teaching culture. That is by far, to me, is the biggest shift. Another huge shift is the focus on mental health. Make it safe to talk about mental health. We're really good about physical health. You break your leg, not a problem. Get it taken care of. I always coach leaders up and say, look, health is health, whether it's physical or mental. We just want you to be healthy. When you're healthy, you're productive. How do we get you to healthy? Just like I was talking to that leader, get to happy. And when you get to happy, everything else gets better. It really does. You feel better. You're more productive. You're excited to be at work. When you're healthy. When you're not healthy, it's really hard to be productive.
So, Chester, as a leader, choosing the right external partners is critical. So, when evaluating potential agency partners, what would you say are the top qualities you look for to ensure alignment with your leadership vision?
Yeah, this is going to sound silly, but are they happy? I mean, do they like what they do? Is key. Obviously, do your values align? On resilience and hard work and caring about your people and caring about your customers, making sure you've got a world class product. To me, it's are they happy? Do you like to be with them? You know, when you think about a partner or a supplier, and they're coming for a visit, does it make you smile or does it make you worry? Geez, yeah, weren't they just here? Do we have to see them again? So is there that alignment? And to me, the alignment is like, do they enjoy their work? Are they really good at it? Do our values align? And are they happy? I mean, listen, life is short. I don't want to be around grumpy people. I just don't. I haven't got time for it.
So, then what would you say are the red flags that would then make you reconsider working with an agency partner?
Reliability, if they tend to be late, if their billing lags, if there's a lack of care, do they ask good questions? Is it all about them or is it all about you? It's really interesting. My dad always had these great little jokes. He'd say, it's like, you're at the bar and you're talking to somebody and they say, well, that's why I think I'm great. Oh, why don't you tell me why you think I'm great? It's all about them. I love people that are interested in other people, and so I think a red flag is it all about them? Another red flag is just reliability. Do they show up? And do they show up early? When people are consistently just a little late, that's one of my pet peeves. Like, just don't be late. You know, yeah, yeah. It's like for this podcast. I'm going to show up at least 10 minutes early because you never know. Something's going to go wrong with your internet connection or your cameras on the fritz or whatever. Give yourself 10 minutes to figure it out. So those are some red flags for me. Do they enjoy their work? Are they reliable? Are they happy?
If you were to look at like a key leadership conversation that you think executives need to be having more of right now to stay ahead, what would you say that needs to be?
I think you just always got to be focused on development. I think the best leaders are curious. I love Michael Bungay Stanier wrote a wonderful book called The Coaching Habit. And he said, 7 questions that will change the way you lead forever. And when you're asking questions, he said, ask a question and stay curious just a little longer. And I love that mentality. What am I learning? How am I growing? How am I developing? How can I stay curious just a little longer? Ask one more question. Be curious about just one more thing. And I think if leaders can establish that in themselves and in their culture, that's exciting and that's very engaging. When I'm learning and I'm growing, right? I was with a group of high potential leaders in Turks and Caicos. It was beautiful. And there was one young leader there. He said, I had a mentor tell me, if you're not learning, you're not earning. Isn't that great? If you're not learning, you're not earning. If you want to earn, learn, And he said, look, I wanted to work in this industry and I got a job as a dishwasher. I said, well, that's beneath me. He goes, take the job and learn and grow. Because if you're not learning, you're not earning. And he's moved up, from dishwasher to sous chef to, running the kitchen to now running the beach. And it is that mentality of I'm here to learn is a great one.
So then, speaking about mentors, I mean, who have been the key mentors or influences that shaped your leadership approach and helped you get to where you are today?
Yeah, Kent Murdoch was the CEO of a company that I worked with. He was the one that challenged me to write the book on recognition. And yeah, I was a salesman at the time and thought if we had a book, it would really be helpful. He goes, great, write the book. I went, I don't write. And he said, you're a smart guy, figure it out. And then he hired a writer. So he gave me the tools and enabled me to be able to do it. And we've been a partnership for over 25 years now. So yeah, Kent Murdoch. Marshall Goldsmith has been a tremendous mentor. He invited me into the 100 coaches. He taught me how to be an executive coach. Both me and Adrian. In fact, we go to celebrate in London in November. Thinkers 50 nominated us as two of the top executive coaches in the world. Never would have happened. I didn't even know what executive coaching was, you know. And we have our Mondays with Marshall, where he just sits us down and imparts his wisdom. So if I had to point to those two, on the personal side, it's without question my father and my four older brothers. Tremendous examples of integrity and hard work. And then I would be remiss if I didn't mention my co-author, Adrian Gostick, who's a wonderful mentor and teacher to me. I will tell you, though, the two areas, without question, is my lovely wife, Heidi. And lastly, I would say my faith community has been tremendous. I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, but people know us as the Mormons. And I grew up in a wonderful community, very caring, service-oriented. When I was 19, I volunteered to become a missionary for my church. They can send you anywhere in the world. Kia, they sent me to southern Italy for 2 years.
What I want to know from you is if you could sit down with any current global CEO today to discuss the future of leadership resilience, who would it be? And what's one question you'd ask them?
Wow, a global CEO.
Yeah.
Probably Warren Buffett. He's just lived so long. I think he would be fascinating. Such a wealth of wisdom. Yeah. I think I would ask him, what are you most proud of? What's your greatest accomplishment? And probably the follow-up question would be, of all the people that you've mentored, who are you most proud of?
Thank you so much for joining us today.
And thank you, Kia. It's been a delight. You can call me anytime.
Curious about what top brands look for when choosing an agency? Tune into our latest episodes where we reveal the decision-making secrets of leading brands. Subscribe to the DesignRush podcast and stay ahead of the competition.